As we enter our church this morning, bring your best self and your struggling self. Bring your mistakes and your triumphs. Bring your shortcomings and your recommitment to good. Bring yourself here and open your heart to beauty, to truth, to the door that is open to the presence of God. Here in this church, we are trying to walk together on the peaceable way, trying to hammer out division and hatred and all that separates one from the other. We try, and we will fall short, but held in love, we try again. We come together this morning as a church to bow our heads in prayer, to raise our voices in song, to remember our promises and vow to live by them once again. Come, let us worship together on this beautiful morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Church of Los Alamos. I am the Reverend John Cullinan, your minister here. As Unitarian Universalists, we affirm and promote the inherent dignity and worth of all people and gather together in a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Whoever you are, whomever you love, wherever you are at this moment, here or watching from home, wherever you are on your life's journey, you are welcome to be a part of this community. I want to extend a special welcome today to any visitors or first-time guests we have among us. I would love to introduce myself after the service as we all gather for coffee and conversation in the fellowship hall, answer any questions you might have about our service today or about our Unitarian Universalist community. Would you all please rise in body or spirit and join in our opening hymn number 298. Please remain standing and join in our affirmation. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve life in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony. Thus do we covenant with each and with all. Please be seated. Our joys and our sorrows appear to be being kept quiet and close to our hearts this week. However, I do have one sorrow for us to share this morning. We learned on Friday that our dear friend and member Janet Lampkin passed away on Thursday afternoon. We know not too much more about the situation at this point, and I don't have any word on memorials, but as is our tradition, I light our candle of life, and I ask for a moment of silence in honor of Janet Lampkin. Please join with me now in a spirit of prayer and reflection. Eternal and beloved, gracious source of all life and all love, we come together this morning grateful for this time out of time, which we have set apart so that we might become more fully present to our own selves, to one another, to our communities, to that which we call holy. May our joys be celebrated together, our wounds be healed together, our hearts be opened together. Spirit of life, ever adapting and renewing, we yearn for stability, for even one moment of feeling like we know what is going on, for the ability to predict and prepare for what is coming next. Yet we also yearn for change. We ache for a world that turns aside from racism, violence, dehumanization, and disregard for suffering. We pray for a change in the illness, grief, isolation, incarceration, and vulnerability of our loved ones. We reach for connections that will remind us that we are worthy as we are, and we reach for connections that will help us to become our best selves. Hold us in the heart of both and. Cradle us in the mystery. Cherish us in the eternal presence of love, and encourage us on the path of growth and development. As individuals and as a people, help us to become who we are called to be. Lead us to open pathways to deeper wisdom through reconciliation, self-respect, and mutual respect, compassion, and owning and making amends for our mistakes. Source of wonder, move us to express and live in gratitude for the beauty of this world, the loving people in our lives, and this day of possibility. To this we add the meditations of our hearts. All this we pray in the names of those known and unknown, present and absent, remembered and forgotten, in the names of all the helpers of humankind. Amen. Our story this morning comes to us via an old African folk tale retold and reset by the Reverend Chris Bice, minister at our church in Knoxville, Tennessee. It's called God's Hat. Once upon a time, there was a village with a road that went straight through the center of town. One day, something strange happened. God walked down the road, and she was beautiful. She wore a long flowing robe. On top of her head, there was a wonderful hat. All the people stopped to stare at God as she walked by, and they kept staring until she disappeared into the distance. "Boy, God sure was beautiful," said one man. "And what a beautiful blue hat she had on." "Yes, God was beautiful," said a woman from the other side of the street. "But it wasn't a blue hat she was wearing, it was a red hat." "You're wrong," said the man. "It was definitely a blue hat." "No, you're wrong," said the woman. "It was definitely a red hat." And as the two argued, others joined in the dispute. Soon the whole village was arguing. All the people on one side of the road were certain that God was wearing a blue hat, and all the people on the other side of the road were certain that God was wearing a red hat. People got mad and started screaming at each other, until finally the people got so angry that they decided to build a wall that went straight down the center of town. From that point on, the people on one side of the wall were enemies with the people who lived on the other side of the wall, and they never spoke to each other. On one side of the wall, the people built a church where they worshiped a God that wore a blue hat. And on the other side of the wall, the people built a church where they worshiped a God that wore a red hat. Many years passed, and the people were still enemies. And then one day, God came walking back through the village. She was smiling and balancing on top of the wall the people had built so many years ago. This time, she was wearing no hat at all. All the people ran to the wall and cried, "You must settle our argument." "Yes," said one man, "the people on that side of the street say that when you walked through the village many years ago, you were wearing a blue hat. But we know better. We know you were wearing a red hat. So tell us, God, what color was your hat?" God looked puzzled for a moment and began to scratch her head in thought. "I think I remember walking through this village many years ago," said God. "And on that day, I believe I was wearing my hat that is blue on one side and red on the other." And saying nothing more, God continued walking down the wall until she disappeared off into the distance. It was a very quiet moment. Suddenly, there was the sound of one child laughing. Then another child started laughing, and another, and soon the whole village was roaring with laughter. Everyone was laughing because they realized just how foolish they had been. As the sound of laughter grew louder and louder, the wall began to shake and crumble until finally it came tumbling down to the ground. For many, many years after that day, the people told the story of God's hat and how laughter had torn down the wall between a divided and foolish people. That'll wake you up on a hot, lazy morning, yeah. Two weeks ago, I returned home from our UUA's General Assembly in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. General Assembly, for those of you not deep into the inside baseball of Unitarian Universalism, is our annual conference where we do the work of governance of the whole association, done by the work of delegates from our own churches, because we are a congregational polity church and we are directed by the members who sit in the pews here. And so I went as a ministerial delegate. We were joined by one other in-person delegate, Felicia Orth, and Kathy Gursky and Sue over here, Dryja, as our virtual delegates, tuning in from remote and still being able to vote and participate in the discussions. If you were with us last week, then you were able to, no, 2 weeks ago, I'm sorry. 2 weeks ago, while I was still at the assembly, you were able to see the video from the Sunday morning worship at General Assembly with about 2,000 or more Unitarian Universalists gathered, plus other welcome guests from the community. And you saw the sermon from the Reverend Manish Mishra Marzetti, my colleague at our church in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And you heard him talk with passion and with personal attachment to, about the need for change and the courage that it takes to change and the faithfulness that is needed to make changes in hard times when you are feeling at your lowest. What you didn't hear in that service was the choir anthem that came right before it, and it's online. I will share a link to it just so you can see what I'm talking about. But right before he gave his sermon, the General Assembly choir did a knockout arrangement of Bob Dylan's "The Times They Are A-Changin'." You know, when I say knockout, I say that because it had even more soul to it than Bob's original rendition, and it's a pretty soulful rendition to begin with. And because of the arrangement, it was like hearing the song for the first time all over again. And listening to what Dylan was asking us to consider back in 1960, whatever, at the heights of the civil rights movement and the protest against the Vietnam War. And right there was the heart of what the theme of General Assembly for this year was all about. Change is coming. And they decided to use the theme faithfully becoming, much like Reverend Manish talked about in his sermon. We are faithfully becoming the people we want to be, the faith we want to be, and the communities as we want to see it. And it was framed in terms of the state of Unitarian Universalism right now, up against the state of our nation right now, responding to times that have changed, whether we like it or not, because of the pandemic, because of the political divisiveness in the country, the despair we feel watching anti-democracy on the rise, or the creeping bits of fascism, and hearing the increased call for wider rights and acceptance of all kinds of people in this country, all within the wake of a pandemic that has done serious harm to all of our churches over this time, reduced our attendance every Sunday, our membership, churches struggling with finances, and a national movement that has seen the pool of religious professionals, ministers and religious education professionals especially, starting to diminish because the times have changed in such a way that either they question their calling, question what they believe anymore, or have been rocked by everybody's fear over the times that have changed, and especially post-pandemic church, by the congregations that they serve. There is a shortage of professionals right now willing to work in parishes as a result of all of this. It is a national epidemic for us. Some have accused the UUA of forcing change upon us in these years, especially around the revision of our second article in the bylaws of the UUA, which we know as our principles. But much of the change that is coming isn't a desire so much as a response. The Reverend Chris Bice, who wrote our story this morning, preached the sermon at this year's Service of the Living Tradition, which takes place on Thursday evening and celebrates our religious professionals entering or leaving, mourning the deaths of those we have lost. And at the heart of his sermon, again, was courage, but also the stark reality that we're not changing because we want to, but because we have to. Times have changed and we can't stand still. Scary to think about. The one workshop I was able to attend in person that weekend was called, rather alarmingly and provocatively, Disrupt Church. It was the professional staff of the community church in Manhattan, a church that has been through it in some ways that outweigh even what we've been through. In recent years, they've gone from a large church with a 6-building campus to having sold 5 of those buildings, including their sanctuary, and now worshiping in space that they rent from another church in the neighborhood. They've had to think creatively and differently about what church is and how we do it. And they asked a series of questions that have left me scratching my head and leading me to say this are conversations we need to have in our own congregation as well. Do the ways in which we do church, they ask, match our mission? Can we stop and think about where and how and when church could happen in our community? And they advise us that this conversation should be a slow process. We should not rush into big changes. We should let go of our expectations about what might come out at the end of those conversations, because if we set out with expectations, we will be unable to see the good ideas that come out. And perhaps most importantly and most frighteningly, they advise us that the old ways won't work again. Absolutely frightening if you're a religious professional, and probably if you're hearing it as a member in the pew as well. Change is really, really uncomfortable, incredibly awkward, an unknown that is frightening, even when we want to change. Even when we want to change, the outcomes may be scary. Especially when we are entering into the kind of work and the kind of conversations where we need to balance our current needs with the future that our values are calling us to build. We saw this play out as delegates this year in the form of a business resolution, a directive that is submitted as a potential resolution to give to the Board of Trustees of our association, something they must do to carry out the business of the association. And if that sounds like it normally should just be a really boring thing that nobody would pay attention to, you're absolutely right. But the one business resolution this year came from the youth and young adults caucuses at General Assembly. Standing at the forefront of what environmental justice needs to look like, knowing full well in their youth just how desperate the situation is and what needs to change so they still have a world to grow old into. They proposed that the investment committee of the association divest itself from any other fossil fuel investments they have in their portfolio and any that are invested in the infrastructure that allows drilling to happen, and further that the money that came from that divestiture be given away as reparations to communities, and especially indigenous communities, that have been harmed by drilling throughout the years. Balancing our current needs with the future our values call us to build. We all know how desperate and how immediate the environmental situation is here around the planet. And yet, our investments as an association are done with a sense of value and faith that tries to do the best it can to keep the work of the association going that we all benefit from, that we all need right now, and especially at this time when all of our churches are facing regrowth and change. It was acknowledged that divestment was a good idea, but a major objection was put out there to the reparations part because it was a step too far. It would gut the budget of our association to a point where layoffs would happen, where programs would be cut at this time that we need it most. And yet, it was intensely compelling to hear our youth and our young adults talk about the situation. I don't know which way I was going as that discussion went on. And then one of our youth, who comes from an indigenous community in Alaska, spoke in tears about the real deaths that had come to her community because of the way drillings are carried out. And I was despondent. I did not know what to do. I wrestled for hours after the ballot opened for that day about how I would vote. And what I came to finally was a pretty solid confidence that the motion was not going to pass based on the tenor in the room. So I voted for it because it met with my values, but I only felt comfortable voting for it because I knew it wasn't gonna come through. And I'm still wrestling with the guilt that comes with, honestly, what's kind of a cynical calculation on my part. Change ain't easy. It is uncomfortable. The outcome was not great, but the best that could happen under the circumstances. And despite the failure of the motion, the investment committee and the new board of the UUA expressed their recommitment to getting out of the fossil fuel business. But where I felt despondent in that regard, I still came out of the whole process with a sense of deep hope about who we are and where we're going. And that hope came in the form of how we handled the business of looking at revisions for Article 2, our purpose and our principles and our sources. I presented the draft of that text in a sermon back in January and held a small group discussion with some of you to talk about your feelings on the changes and what you hoped might be changed or be seen as revisions happened. And in between that time and going to the assembly itself, something in the neighborhood of like 80-something amendments were proposed to correct language, change language, make a document that met more with the spirit of the people who were considering it. 30 or so of those were combined into single amendments where they were repetitive and then were presented as kind of the prioritized amendments to Article 2. And debate and discussion ensued. And what I saw out of that was a process of discussion among people who did not necessarily agree about everything, but who all came with a spirit of wanting us to be the best we can be, to live into the promises that we make, whether or not we agreed with how we did that. What we came to the end was the creation of a document that reflected more of our whole sense of who we are and the values we want to broadcast into the world. Last week, when I talked about why I'm a Unitarian Universalist, I talked about the rabbinical tradition we seem to engage in, where we are in constant conversation with the people who have come before us and the ideas that have been expressed and all the literature that has been written. How we struggle and argue with the Emersons and the Thoreaus and the Channings of the world, deciding whether or not what they said then still applies today, or what it means today when the world has changed so much. Trying to see if we need new ways of expressing it or new expressions at all. And this alone was one big example of what it means to say we are a living tradition. We have been in constant conversation with our principles from the moment they were passed in 1980, whatever. And what we see right now is the result of that 40 years of conversation around the values that we profess and put out into the world. We've learned new things. We've learned sometimes the way we express them doesn't express enough. Needs to find a way to draw the circle wider. And so we start to restate what our values are in ways that are compelling for the times and in ways that might be attractive to people who have not found us yet. So I left General Assembly hopeful, despite the minor anxiety attack I was having of being in a convention center with 2,000 other people with a mask on, but still that was a lot. But I left hopeful because we are still, despite disagreements about who we are and how we carry out our missions, we are still behaving like the living tradition that we claim to be, because we are having our conversations faithfully, and we are trying to faithfully become who we want to be in the world. And I got to see that even though we know we struggle here, we are all of our churches navigating those same waters right now. I won't say we're all in the same boat, because some of us are set up better than others, but we're all struggling. And in the midst of the struggle, some of us are finding new ways to think about church and how we can do church in times that have changed, whether we like it or not. And that those who are making those discoveries are sharing them more freely with all of us, so we don't all have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to do it alone. We are making it clear no church has to go it alone in these times. And I'm hopeful because our new leadership sees us, sees our congregation, sees the struggle, and understands the struggle too, because our association is right in those same waters with us. At the end of General Assembly, we affirmed the appointment of the Reverend Sophia Bettencourt as our new president of the Unitarian Universalist Association. And I think she's an amazing choice. One, she's been a leader in Unitarian Universalism for 2 decades now. She's wicked smart, as we would say, where I grew up, with a PhD in environmental ethics. And she's done the job before briefly when we had a co-presidency in 2017 after our president resigned. She's super qualified. And she is our first out queer Afro-Latina president, which, yeah, I know how we feel about identity politics one way or the other. But I gotta say, in the face of the resurgence of Christian nationalism and conservative religion having a loud voice, that's one hell of a statement to make right now. But more than all of that, what struck me about her was the attitude she approaches the work with. I had the chance to sit in on 2 question and answer forums with her, one with the Ministers Association prior to General Assembly, and one at the General Assembly itself with the delegates. And what came out more clearly than anything to me, listening, and I rewatched it again this morning just to get that sense again, is the level of compassion she brings in these weird, troubling, uncertain times. Communal care, she said more than once. Communal care sits at the heart of her leadership philosophy. How we care for one another and expand that sense of care is the thing that's going to make the difference as we grow into this new world. She said at one point, we were struggling with fear and scarcity even before we got up to the pandemic. We were struggling with that fear and that scarcity until 2020, and then the pandemic came and just exacerbated everything that we feared and were worried about. And in those years, we turned inward towards ourselves and we took care of one another in our congregations as best as we knew how. And now we emerge again, and now, she says, it is time for all of us to extend that sense of care back out into the world, expand the sense of care, and rebuild the relationships that may have been lost when we had to lock down. Someone asked, in that regard, so how do we care? How does the UUA care, but how do we care, all of us, especially for our small churches that are struggling so mightily in these times? She relayed the story that came from another one of her candidate forums earlier in the year when a minister asked or stated that it's been hard coming out of the pandemic. And if I were to put a number to it, he said, I would say we're only at 70% of what we were before 2020. And she said, 70%? That's amazing. That's amazing. Don't feel like that's not enough. That's huge. What if, it's going to sound a little odd, especially to some of our leaders, but I want you to sit with it for a second. What if the goal right now was just 40%? What if instead of running full speed towards 2019, we took time? We lessened and lowered our expectations. There's that disrupt church thing coming back into it again. Who we were in 2019 is not who we are now, and may not be who we are ever again? What if instead of burning all of our energy to make it 2019 again, what if we took time out to just talk to one another? Took time for resting, for visioning, for reconnecting, for imagining. Let go of expectations. Imagine what we could be. It's easier, she said, it is easier to grow from 40% than it is to heal from the burnout that emerges from charging nonstop towards 150%. What I experienced at General Assembly was our experience here in our pews in Los Alamos, reflected on a big screen across our entire denomination. We are all coming out of hard times. Some of us worse for the wear than others, but all of us bloodied, but not yet bowed. We are all uncertain of what's next. We're all scared of the unknown that changes may ask us to do. We may need to make to move forward, but we are all still believing in the values that guide us. We are all still in the conversation of a living tradition. We are all still willing to struggle with what our values mean and wanting to state them better. We all want to still be the church we dream of in the time and the place where we are as it is. We've got our work cut out for us here. But I have hope we can do it. If we worry less about what we expect to happen and worry more about giving ourselves the time to sit with one another and have those conversations and faithfully become who we want to be. May it be so. As we prepare to return to our everyday lives, it is time to give something of the gifts of this congregation to the larger community we are part of. It is time for our offering. During the month of July, all cash and undesignated funds we collect on Sunday will be given to our friends at Strong in Nature in support of their work working on healing victims of domestic and sexual violence. You may give through the baskets this morning, through the GiveLify app if you're using that, or drop it in the box at the back of the sanctuary. The offering will now be accepted. May what you give bring you joy and into deeper relationship with this community. Important announcements and upcoming events can be found on the back page of your order of service, through our announcements email list, in our monthly newsletter, The Voice, through our Facebook page, and who knows how many other media we're doing that through with now. I want to point out just a few special things this morning. First up, the folks who've been handling the Afghan refugee assistance over the last couple of years are having a backpack drive currently for the children who will be going back to school. They're looking to put together 75 new backpacks for elementary, middle, and high school people with complete sets of school supplies for whatever level. We will be accepting, school supplies will be accepted at White Rock Methodist, at Bethlehem Lutheran, here, and Trinity on the Hill. There is a supply list available, which I will send out later today in the email. Also, gift cards are appreciated for those who can't provide school supplies. Denominations like $25 to stores like Target and Walmart to assist with the purchases would be great help. We'll be collecting through July 24th, so please take a look at that list when it goes out and donate if you can. Again, putting out an appeal, we will be present at a couple of the summer concerts at Ashley Pond on Fridays before the season is out. Patrick Webb is leading up that effort for us, so if you are interested in helping out on one of the Fridays that will be present there with our information booth, get in touch with him and help us out there. Much to the same, we will be present, as we have been for several years, at the county fair. We will have our info booth at Ashley Pond with the rest of the booths that are up there. It's always a good time. We always have some great conversations with new people, and sometimes they actually want to come here after they've talked to us. So if you want to take part in some community outreach, please join me so I don't have to be all by my lonesome for 6 hours at the info booth at the county fair. Also, if you think marching in the parade this year might be fun, because we haven't done that in a while, come and talk to me too. I'd like to see if we can put together a nice contingency to be seen there as well.
Well, I was going to issue an invitation to many of you to go ahead and give our Soul Matters groups a try. Basically, during the full year, well, what I notice is that at least half the congregation is already participating, which strikes me that maybe there's something to that. Basically, Soul Matters is a program that has been started by the Unitarian Universalists to encourage congregations to focus on certain spiritual issues, matters, values, by dealing, instead of just globally supporting our commitment to support each other in a free and honest search for the truth, or not the truth, for truth. And so they've done a really nice thing, I think. They usually issue, well, they select a value, they issue packets to both to the worship folks, so that congregationally people are sort of on the same page. There's another packet that goes to the RE group so that they can kind of help kids to engage in a general conversation. And then the third one that I'm pretty much dealing with at this point is the small groups, that packets that go to individuals. We have been trying it now since January. We focus on things like, actually, delight was one, courage was another, resistance was another, vulnerabilities. So what happens is that each month, participants get a packet, And there are 3 parts to the packet. One of them is a list of spiritual exercises that do not include sackcloth and ashes, by the way. It also includes a list of questions to ponder, and then has a resource packet at the end which ranges from ideas about the word origin of what people like. In fact, I find that interesting to probe what things have meant over time. There are things in that resource packet that deal with quotes that are interesting, some of them uncomfortable, but interesting. There are also everything from playlists dealing with the topic to movies and YouTubes, and so, however you like to get input, it's a nice source. One word about the exercises. They meet all sorts of people where they are, I think. If you like to engage in more personal reflection, there's often a suggestion for how to do that. If you like to engage in creative things, to me, one of the most moving ones that we had in our session was somebody who wrote a poem that was really one of the more deeper conversations. I mean, it struck me deeply and actually encouraged me to, having thrown that one off, to try. Didn't come anywhere close, but still, we learned from each other. If you like to engage in deep conversations, there are suggestions for how to do that with your friends. So anyway, there are things that you actually participate, you actually do. And so you're asked to consider one of those, or being Unitarian Universalist, if there's something else if that doesn't speak to you, but there's something in the packet that strikes your fancy, do it. So you're asked, so what you will be asked to do if you try this out for the month of July, and there will be another session in August. You'll be asked to sign up, and it needs to be done pretty quickly because you need time to explore those exercises. You need time to explore the list of questions to see how they relate to you. They love to use the word shimmer. Live with the questions and see which one shimmers for you. It could also be quoted as which one floats your boat, or which one challenges you, like, ooh, that one makes me uncomfortable, I wonder why. So you're asked to engage in the exercises, consider the questions, and then the third part is that on the 4th week of the month, we have the small groups where we gather together in groups of 5 to 8 people, and we explore the experiences. We found that one of the most anxious times, pretty much our most anxious period, was that first meeting. Like, am I going to do it right? I have no idea what's going on, that kind of thing. And it took that first session to kind of work through those. And that's why we're doing the try-its. Give it a try without having to, commit to a full year. No obligation, you come, you do it. What happens in the, meetings are basically 4 things. Each person shares their experience from the past 3 weeks in terms of the exercise and what they discovered as a result of that. The second part, meanwhile, everybody else, essentially is mum. In other words, there are no interruptions. So you get a chance to kind of explore something on your own without explorations. Then the people are listening, what I would say, generously. Then the second part is the people in the group get to share gratitude for what they have heard, and also to speak to points that might have struck a chord with them. again, the poem, that struck a chord with me that, poetry can get to a deeper level than I had been dealing with. So we express gratitude and we share our new insights. Third part, we do the same thing, same process with the questions. What did the questions do? Where did it take you? And then the fourth part, again, is the other members of the group express gratitude for your insights or how it sparks. So that's essentially it. It's a chance to engage with people on a different level, those deeper conversations, which seems uncomfortable maybe at first, but we found that almost by the end of the first session, most people were becoming comfortable with it. There is no one right way, I stress that, to react to this. It is for you. It is for your personal exploration and a chance to speak of it in a very accepting group who's providing you with support. So if you'd like to try it out, we are, offering you a no obligations, free opportunity to engage in this, either this month or next month. We will be meeting, the topic for this that we've chosen is belonging and connections, and how do you, which speaks really to what John was saying about the communal life, and how do we experience it on a deeper level. And we'll be having our meeting on Saturday, the 29th of July. We'll probably meet in the library, but we'll determine that. So please sign up very soon. And John, you might have ideas about the logistics.
I sent out a link to a sign-up Genius form to sign up last week. Some people have said they've been having issues with that. Others have been able to do it. So I'll resend the link this week. But if you're here today and you're interested, just come talk to me in coffee hour and we can leave the technology out of it. Yes, they are.
So we have Evan there, and we have Bill, and then me.
Thank you. Would you all now please rise in body or spirit and join in our closing hymn, number 1212. Friends, may life bless us and keep us. May the light of life shine upon us and out from within us and be gracious to us and bring us peace. For this is the day. This is the one wild and precious life we have been given. So let us all find a way to rejoice and be glad in it. Go in peace.